Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Missing in Action project from UW-Madison, Missing in Action Recovery and Identification project that we have on campus. And this is our training tutorial that we're going to show you some methods that we use to research in the missing in action fields and how we eventually work towards advancing cases and eventually hopefully making a recovery and an identification of MIA individuals. I'm Dr. Vanessa Cook. I'm the historian for the Missing in Action project, and I'm joined here by Alicia Lawson. She is the student lead researcher. She's been with the project for a few years now, and she's a senior in history and anthropology at UW-Madison. And so she's very familiar with a lot of the cases that we have and very skilled at the research methods. So I'm going to turn it over to her about halfway through the presentation, and she will show you in more detail some of the techniques that we use for training our volunteers and for advancing cases towards a possible recovery. So I'm going to bring up my presentation now. I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully you can all see that now. So a little bit of background on the UW-Madison MIA project and what we do. It is always our primary mission to honor the memory of service members who have served, whether they came back from war or not. But it is our mission to try and recover those who do not make it back, who are still considered missing in action. And this is something that affects almost every town in Wisconsin. There are over 80,000 missing in action cases still unresolved, going back to World War II. And over 1,500 of them are from Wisconsin. So men and women who enlisted from towns in Wisconsin. And you can see from the map how we were able to locate concentration points of where many of these MIA soldiers hailed from in Wisconsin. And so this is also a global problem because, you know, these MIAs served in World War II, both in the European theater and the Pacific theater, and in wars subsequent to that in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. And so you can see again concentration points of where many of our US service member MIAs are thought to have died and their remains may still be there. We do focus mostly on Wisconsinites because we are dedicated to the Wisconsin idea at UW-Madison and helping citizens of Wisconsin and family members who are still grieving the loss of their MIA ancestors. And most of the cases that we work on are airplane crashes. And there are a couple of primary reasons for that. An airplane crash is by nature a very dynamic and dramatic event. And that means that there is a greater possibility that someone may remember that happening, you know, on their farmland near their town. They may remember a relative or a friend talking about it. And so it gives us a greater possibility that there may be an eyewitness account or a written account of that event. And also just the nature of an air crash, again, there's a greater possibility or potential for physical evidence to be left back, still remaining even decades later. And so that is why we mostly follow through on airplane crashes in Europe, in the Pacific theater, in Asia. Now, of those almost 80,000 cases, I said that we usually focus on Wisconsinites, but we have made recoveries of non-Wisconsinites. Our MIA project team has been involved in partnership with the DPAA, which is an acronym meaning the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. And that's the arm of the Department of Defense that's dedicated to working on these 80,000 MIA cases that are still outstanding. And so our history, the UW-Madison partnership with the DPAA began back in around 2014, 2015, when the DPAA, we helped the DPAA with the recovery of an MIA crash site in Northern Europe. And then that partnership has continued. And so during that time, the MIA project team has helped with 3 recoveries, and there are recoveries excavations that may happen this summer, COVID permitting. And this project really relies on a very diverse team of MIA project staff members, many of whom are UW-Madison employees, faculty members. Our director is also the director of the Biotech Center. But our student volunteers, many of them students at UW-Madison, and from a variety of disciplines and backgrounds and fields. So you can see their history, genealogy, archaeology, forensic anthropology, business, and they can all bring skills to this research. So even if you're not a historian or you're not really into historical research, it doesn't mean that you can't bring something valuable to MIA research. And all of our cases start, any MIA case starts with historical research, either online or through reference books. Then it moves into geographical locating, mapping, geographical mapping to try and figure out what course the aircraft was on, where it may have crashed, where people may have evacuated from the plane before it crashed, where it may have gone down. And so that involves some geographic mapping and trying to pinpoint a specific location. And then after, it could take many years to figure that out, then it moves into the archaeology phase when we're pretty sure of a location of a crash site or where an MIA remains might still be. Then we work again in partnership with the DPAA to do field work, to actually excavate that site and try to recover those remains. And that's again where the MIA project at UW-Madison, we've sent team members, staff members, and volunteers over to do that field work for the past several summers, and we're hoping to continue that again as soon as possible. But the end product, once we make a recovery and those remains are brought home, the final result is very scientific. It's DNA analysis, and the DPAA has a lab in Hawaii and elsewhere in the country that does that work of analysis on all MIAs. And the MIA project at UW-Madison assists in some ways with that, but it's primarily the lab work of the DPAA that makes that final confirmation on the identity of any MIA remains. So you can see there is quite a process to this MIA research, and it does take several years, sometimes decades, to make that final confirmation, given that we need to get permissions from foreign countries and go through all the paperwork and analysis to get to that point. But the MIA project at UW-Madison is very proud that it was able to partner with the DPAA on 3 recoveries and identifications, and you can see them listed right there. And so that is our mission. That's what we're driving towards when we start any new case. So many of our student volunteers, they come to us to start researching, and Alicia will assign them a case and train them in the different methods and techniques to start the historical and geographic research that I just mentioned a couple minutes ago. So I'm going to turn this over to her now. Alicia, if you can share your screen once I stop doing that, and she's going to pick up on the methods.
Hello, everybody. Just give me 1 second as I share.
And while she's doing that, I do want to say that even though I just mentioned that we usually work on airplane crash sites, another reason that we have very few naval MIA cases is because many deep water recoveries are difficult to recover those remains because we don't have the technology or resources to make deep water recoveries at this time. So this case of Earl Edminster, he was in the Navy. So that is sort of a rarity that we're working on this case as an active case. So Alicia.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for introducing me earlier. I'm Alicia Lawson. I'm the Student Historical Research Lead. As Vanessa said, I've been with the team since 2019, and I'm currently a senior here at UW-Madison. So Sonarman 3rd class Earl Edwin Edminster is one of the many Wisconsinite missing in action service members. He served during World War II in the Pacific on the USS Johnston, which is a Fletcher-class destroyer that was assigned to a fleet. The USS Johnson took part of the Battle of Samar on October 25th, 1944, which was the re-invasion of the Philippines. So the third class fleet, which the USS Johnson was a part of, was actually drawn north as a decoy fleet to pursue a decoy fleet from the Japanese, leaving only the USS Johnston and a couple of other ships to protect the landing crew or the landing soldiers on Samar. So the Taffy 3, while this was happening, a large Japanese fleet surprised Taffy 3, which USS Johnson was a part of. And in the ensuing battle, the USS Johnson actually sank. The USS Johnson actually played a vital role in this battle, as they actually convinced, through their aggression, the Japanese that there was a much larger fleet that they were attacking, which caused the Japanese to withdraw after a long time. The USS Johnson sank, but it was considered one of the greatest naval military hours in history. And the USS Johnson, out of torpedoes, charged down to the Japanese fleet to protect and draw fire from other ships. And it was dead in the water, surrounded by Japanese ships, when the order to abort or to abandon ship came. Out of the 325 service members on board, only about 140 survived. The other ones either going down with the ship, were killed in the battle, or were on life rafts and were never heard from again. The Earl Edminster was actually one of those that we believe went down with the ship. He was a sonar man, so his job was to listen and tell the captain of the ship where exactly the torpedoes and other attacks were coming from in the water in order to help the Johnston avoid those. So he had a very, very vital role in allowing the USS Johnson to participate in this battle and keep his whole crew safe. So as you can see, the battle took place in the Philippines, and this is just an image of the Pacific Theater during World War II. So usually what we do when we do one of these workshops is we allow our people that are attending to be able to research the Earl Edminster and the USS Johnston to sort of get their feet wet of how we actually approach research. Because that is not possible because it was recording, I'm just going to go through a couple of different steps that we take and different sites that we use commonly. So Edwin Edminster is one of the 83,000 missing in action service members. Out of that 83,000 though, about 40,000 are water losses and unrecoverable. As Vanessa was saying, is we simply don't have the equipment to do deep water water losses recoveries. So usually what we do is when we're assigned a case, we have a cover sheet that has the basic information that we should know about every MA service member. This is the first step when you're assigned a case to really collecting and starting your research. So things on this sheet could be their service number, their rank, where they were born, their enlistment place, enlistment dates, what ship were they on or what plane were they on, who were the crew members on that plane or who were in their unit. Also, though, we have other biographical information of were they married? What was their height? What was their weight? What was their skin color? Stuff as that, because with height and weight, it seems sort of silly when you're doing historical research to wonder how tall is this guy? But what we do is we're collecting all this information in pursuit and hope of a future recovery of that service member. So if we give a forensic anthropologist, we know this was his average height and maybe he weighed this many pounds upon enlistment. They can use that information to help them create either a positive or a negative identification of the body and the remains that we recover in the lab. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to show you a couple of different sites that we use. One of the main sites that we use is actually Ancestry.com. I don't know if a lot of people use it to research their own family history, but we use it to actually research our MIAs and their own family history, because when we were putting together our research of a service member, we're not just recreating those worst 5 minutes or that final battle that they were in. We're creating a whole entire life. We're thinking, where did they go to school? What were their extracurricular activities in high school? How far away did they have to walk to school? Did they work on the family farm after school and before school? We're doing all of that in order to create a more well-rounded and picture of a person as a whole and not just the events that happened to them. So, as you can see, when you search Ancestry, I searched for Earl E. Edminster, and I have 65 results. A lot of times, these are not all for the same Earl E. Edminster, but you can see there are a couple of ones, such as this is a record of the interment records. And you can see Earl E. Edminster, it says burial place, but a lot of times with missing in action service members, there's actually a wall of the missing that has at each cemetery, and that's where they're honored. So Earl E. Edminster is on the wall of the missing at Manila American Cemetery in the Philippines. You can see this is his service number, which is also there, and you can see his rank was Soundman 3rd class. Another thing that's really interesting is we use federal censuses and also Wisconsin census to really search. So you can see he was in 1930, he lived in Berlin, Wisconsin. How many family members did he have? He had a father named Paul, a mother named Gertrude. He was 4, and he had a sister named Ruth, who was 1. And you can see actually the records. And this is the Edminsters. You can see mother was born in Ohio. Industry, his father worked in a garage. But you can also see all the other people on his block and what their names were and what they did for a living. So it's creating a picture of the neighborhood as well as just the family itself. So this is Ancestry.com. We use it a lot. 2 other very important sites that we use are newspapers.com, which have the records of newspapers going back into the 19th century. So we have the Oshkosh Northwestern or the Wisconsin State Journal. All are scanned into this website, and we can search for Earl E. Edminster and mentions of his name to come up on these newspapers. So the Oshkosh Northwestern. You can see this is the main way people in the 1940s received their news or their information was from the newspapers. So the newspapers are actually a very vital record for us to search. In this one, you can see Edminster of Amro, where he was from, is on the Navy casualty list. So they would print records of these people were wounded in this battle, these people were declared missing, these people were killed. And they would do this in all different newspapers across the country in order to keep people informed of what was happening, not only in the Pacific and the European theater, but also to their neighbors and their family members. So you can see Sonar Martin, 3rd class Earl E. Edminster, and his parents were Mr. and Mrs. Paul, and they were from Amro. And you can see they received the word in January of 1945. A lot of times families, their son would go missing and they wouldn't hear for a month or so because it would take that long for them to be notified. This one as well, you can see is the Wisconsinite casualties, and Earl E. Edminster is listed. A lot of times though, with smaller towns in Wisconsin, there will be listings of personals. So a family member might be listed as this man came home on leave and he visited these 3 people, and that would be in the newspaper. Or there was a track meet and Edminster got 3rd place. That would be listed in the newspaper. So it's very much their main source of information, along with radio. The final site that we use generally in the beginning of our research is Fold 3. This is a military site run through Ancestry, and it has documents dating back to the American Revolution. So I searched Earl Edwin Edminster, and you can see here are Navy muster rolls with him aboard. So before he was on the Johnston, he was actually on the USS Dixie for a little bit. And you can see here's Earl Edwin Edminster from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he enlisted. And this was in April of 43 that he was on board. So we're creating also a picture of what was his service like. Where did he go to boot camp? Where did he ship out of? All of that sort of stuff. You can also see here's a muster roll from the USS Johnston. Here's Earl Edmund Edminster as well, listed on the USS Johnston, which ended up being his final ship that he was aboard. So these are just some very interesting sites that we used to start our research. We use also a different variety of many other sites. We use archives, we use the National Archives catalog. We'll ask libraries across the state and across the country for information. We'll look to museums and their archives. But in this day and age, a lot can be accomplished as well by simply Googling, which seems a little funny. And you do have to be wary about the sites that you choose, but some of them keep popping up and can be used at least to maybe give a direction of this might have been what happened. Now I'm going to see if I can find other records that might support this hypothesis or might disprove this hypothesis. So it's constantly you're building a reference instead of saying, oh, this is what this one site said, that's what happened. It's cross-referencing and making sure and checking every single detail and running down eyewitnesses and looking through this one obscure box of records in the archives. So some of the things that come up when you do Google Earl Edmund Edminster or the USS Johnston as well, because we're interested in what was the ship like? What was all of the stuff? Where was the ship made? Who made the ship? Where was it christened? Where did it first set out from? And where was it stationed throughout the whole entire war? But one of them, which is linked to all of the missing and casualties on the USS Johnston, actually has in the website a remembrance of Earl E. Edminster and his shipmates, and it actually has a personal letter from Earl to his mother on Mother's Day, 1944. So you can see that sometimes you get an obscure site and it has some amazing records that show Earl really cared about his mother and he was sad that he had to miss Mother's Day with her. And that can show sort of also the hardships of these people were being separated from their family for years on end, not able to say where they even were in the world, and their family members had basically no information about their well-being except for maybe a few letters every month or every 2 months. It's also interesting to note is I don't know how many people are 18 or maybe have a sibling that's 18 or has a child who's 18, but Earl was 18 when he died. And can you imagine being the person on that ship in that hull, and he's the one that has this great responsibility to be able to support his captain during battle. And that's how he chose to serve his final hours, was serving his country and his crewmates. Other stuff was we also look at the USS Johnston, as I was saying, and there's actually some great sites with information on this is what happened during the battle. Actually, the captain of the USS Johnston was awarded the Medal of Honor for his bravery and the ship's bravery in this battle. So that just goes to show how extraordinary this ship actually was and the crew actually was and what they were able to accomplish. There are also listings of, these are all of the casualties, and you can see maybe date missing, where was he from, all of that sort of stuff. Other things, one of the actually a very interesting site that we use a lot is Find a Grave. So Find a Grave is basically the Wikipedia for grave sites and graves, in that it has basically every grave that ever was is in the site, but also in the fact that anybody can add to any grave, like anybody can add to any Wikipedia page. So it can have a lot of wealth of interesting information that might be important and might be a good lead, but it's also something to be taken with a grain of salt, like most of our websites. So this one for Earl, Edwin, Edminster, you can see, here's a photo of him in his uniform. And you can see his birth, death, where he was memorialized, and the tablets of the missing. And sometimes people will add a little excerpt about that person, or maybe about, this is accounts of how this plane went down or what happened to this ship. And then it also links family members. So you can see after 1930, as we were looking at that census, he actually had another brother who was born in 1933. And you can link to those families' graves as well. So these are just a couple of the sites that we use. We use a lot more if we're researching a plane. A lot of times we use the bombardment group or the bombardment squadron all have their own sites, and those will have helpful information, or they have their own societies that we reach out to. So it really depends on sort of what case you're doing, what type of loss was it? Was it an air loss, a land loss, a water loss? And that directs your research a lot of the time. Instead of having a couple of sites that we look at and say, case is closed. It's a process, and you get to know very intimately the people that you're researching, and they almost become your family in a way as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Vanessa for some final things. And thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you, Alicia. There are so many avenues to go down, but if you are interested in doing MIA research, either on a family ancestor of yours, or just someone who you know and are interested in, like Alicia said, some of these sites are easy enough and free, like Google, Facebook, Find a Grave. Some of the sites that we use commonly, like Ancestry.com, Fold3.com, newspapers.com, you will need to buy an annual subscription to use those, or go to a public library if they're open, and you can sometimes find those research aids on public library computers that they've bought for the public. But we have a policy at UW-Madison MIA Project of not reaching out to family members to talk about the research or the cases we're working on. But if you do have a Wisconsinite MIA ancestor, if you're a descendant of a Wisconsin MIA, we welcome you to contact us, and we can talk to you about any information that you have on that ancestor. And also, if you're interested in learning more about the Missing in Action Project, other than the brief introduction we offered here, you're welcome to follow us on Facebook. You can find us by searching on Facebook for UW-Madison MIA Project. And then you can also Google the same UW-Madison MIA Project. It'll take you to the Biotech Center webpage. So you're in the right spot if you find the Biotech Center webpage. And that will give more information about the leadership, the people, the staff involved, our history and background, more information on those recoveries that we've helped make and identify. So hopefully we hear from you soon, and hopefully you can find some great information on this kind of research. Thank you so much for joining us today, and check us out online.
Yes, thank you.